Here is the truth a narcissist rarely expects to confront. The moment you stop saving them from their own decisions, the illusion of control they depend on begins to fall apart. For the first time, they must sit with something they never prepared for: consequences. What surprises them the most is not the choice they made. It is the moment you finally allow them to live with that choice. And if this message is already helping you recognize these patterns more clearly, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This space focuses on understanding these behaviors so you can eventually step away from them. One of the strongest traits of a narcissistic mindset is the deep assumption that they should always have control while never facing the consequences that normally come with it. For a narcissist, control is not only about making decisions, it is about shaping reality in ways that protect their ego and maintain their sense of superiority. They often behave as if the rules that apply to everyone else somehow do not apply to them. When they make impulsive choices, walk away from relationships, deliver ultimatums, or create emotional chaos, they usually act with the quiet expectation that someone else will eventually handle the fallout. This expectation forms because many people around them have historically stepped in to repair the damage. Partners apologize even when they did nothing wrong. Family members smooth things over. Friends try to mediate conflicts they started. Over time, the narcissist begins to view this pattern as normal. They assume that no matter how extreme their actions become, someone will rush in to stabilize the situation. This builds a powerful illusion of invulnerability. They start believing their decisions are bold and powerful, when in reality, those decisions have simply never been allowed to carry real consequences. What truly surprises them is the moment this pattern breaks. When the person they expected to control or emotionally manage suddenly stops fixing everything, the narcissist experiences a kind of psychological jolt. The safety net they depended on disappears, and the results of their own actions start unfolding without interference. The control they believed they had turns out to be fragile because it relied completely on someone else's willingness to keep protecting them from themselves. Another deeply unsettling experience for a narcissistic person is the moment they recognize that their decisions actually carry real costs. Narcissists often move through relationships believing their choices will never permanently close doors. When they threaten to leave, start conflict, or push someone away, they usually assume the other person will eventually try to repair things. In their mind, every dramatic decision is reversible because they expect others to remain emotionally available and ready to restore the connection whenever they choose. This belief allows them to behave in ways that seem reckless or detached. They may abruptly end relationships, deliver harsh ultimatums, or withdraw affection to maintain dominance. But underneath those actions lies a hidden expectation that the other person will still be there later, waiting, forgiving, and willing to continue the relationship. To the narcissistic mindset, their decisions are rarely intended to be final. They are tools used to create pressure, regain attention, or reassert control. The shock appears when the person on the receiving end no longer reacts in the expected way. When someone accepts the narcissist's decision and stops chasing them, it disrupts the entire script the narcissist imagined. Instead of the usual cycle of conflict followed by reconciliation, there is distance, silence, and closure. This becomes deeply confusing to a narcissistic individual because it contradicts their belief that they can always return and regain control whenever they want. For the first time, they are forced to face the possibility that their actions have permanently changed the situation. The relationship they assumed would always remain available may no longer be accessible. This realization can trigger disbelief, frustration, and even attempts to rewrite the past, because accepting the finality of their own decision is something their mindset struggles to tolerate. When you stop stepping in to repair the damage a narcissist creates, one of the first reactions they feel is shock. For a long time, many narcissists move through relationships expecting someone else will eventually stabilize whatever chaos they cause. If they say something hurtful, someone will smooth it over. If they threaten to leave, someone will try to pull them back. If they create emotional turmoil, someone will work tirelessly to restore peace. This pattern becomes so familiar that they begin to assume it will always happen. Because of this expectation, narcissists rarely pause to consider the long-term effects of their behavior. They feel comfortable making dramatic choices, walking away suddenly, or issuing ultimatums because they believe those actions will trigger a predictable response. They expect people to chase them, defend them, or try to fix the situation. That reaction becomes part of the system that keeps their sense of control intact. But something powerful happens when you break that pattern, when you stop rescuing them from the consequences of their own actions. The response they receive is no longer what they expected. Instead of panic or desperation, they encounter calm distance. Instead of someone trying to repair the relationship, they see someone stepping back and allowing the result of their decision to stand. This is where the shock begins to appear. The narcissist starts realizing the safety net they relied on is no longer there. The emotional labor they once expected from you has disappeared. Without that protection, the impact of their choices becomes far more visible. What once felt like control now starts to feel uncertain because the system that protected them from consequences has suddenly stopped functioning. For someone with a narcissistic mindset, accountability rarely feels like a normal or healthy part of relationships. Instead, it often feels like an attack or punishment directed at them. When most people face the consequences of their actions, they may feel discomfort, regret, or a sense of responsibility to repair what happened. But a narcissistic personality tends to interpret these moments very differently. Being held responsible challenges the image they work hard to protect, the belief that they are right, justified, and above blame. Because of this, even simple forms of accountability can feel overwhelming to them. If someone calmly points out harmful behavior or refuses to tolerate disrespect, the narcissist may react as if something unfair has been done to them. They might accuse the other person of being overly sensitive, dramatic, or even cruel. In their mind, the focus shifts away from their behavior and toward the idea that they are somehow being mistreated. This mental shift allows them to protect their self-image while avoiding the discomfort of self-reflection. This is why boundaries can feel so threatening to a narcissistic person. A boundary is essentially a quiet form of accountability. It communicates that certain behaviors will no longer be accepted and that actions will carry consequences. But instead of seeing the boundary as reasonable, the narcissist often experiences it as rejection or betrayal. They may react with anger, guilt tripping, or attempts to reverse the blame. The deeper reason behind this reaction is that accountability forces them to face something they tried to avoid, the possibility that their actions hurt others or created real damage. Accepting that reality would require self examination and humility, which conflicts with the identity they have built around always being right and always being in control. When you begin to set firm boundaries with a narcissistic person, something very important changes in the dynamic. Boundaries quietly remove the protection that once shielded them from the consequences of their behavior. For a long time, many narcissists rely on the willingness of others to tolerate, excuse, or repair what they do. When someone continually forgives, explains away hurtful behavior, or tries to maintain peace at all costs, the narcissist rarely has to face the true outcome of their choices. The relationship becomes a place where they can act without fully experiencing the impact of their actions. But a clear boundary interrupts that pattern. It communicates that certain behaviors will no longer be accepted and that the responsibility for those behaviors now belongs entirely to them. When you stop arguing, stop over explaining, and simply hold your position, the narcissist can no longer redirect the situation in the same way. The usual tactics, blame, emotional pressure, or manipulation, begin to lose their effectiveness because the boundary remains in place. This forces them into a situation they are not comfortable with. Instead of shifting responsibility onto someone else, they must sit with the reality that their own decisions created the current outcome. If they push someone away, the distance now remains. If they ended something dramatically, the separation stands. The safety net of someone constantly fixing things is gone. For a narcissistic person, this experience can feel deeply unsettling. Their sense of control depended heavily on other people adapting to them. When those adaptations stop, the outcome of their behavior becomes unavoidable. The boundary does not attack them or argue with them. It simply allows reality to unfold, and that reality reflects the choices they made themselves. When a narcissistic person begins to realize their decision is actually being respected and allowed to stand, they rarely accept that outcome quietly. Instead, they often move into a series of attempts to reverse the situation. The idea that someone has taken their words or actions seriously and is no longer trying to fix things creates a strong sense of discomfort for them. To regain control, they may begin using familiar strategies such as guilt, blame, confusion, or emotional pressure. One of the most common reactions is guilt. The narcissist may suddenly present themselves as the one who has been hurt or abandoned. They might say things suggesting you are being cold, unforgiving, or unnecessarily harsh. The purpose of this reaction is to make you question your decision and feel responsible for their emotional state. If you begin to feel guilty, you may be tempted to soften your boundary and reopen the situation they created. Blame is another frequent tactic. Rather than acknowledging their own actions led to the outcome, they may try to shift the entire narrative. They might claim you misunderstood them, exaggerated the situation, or pushed them into making the decision in the first place. This allows them to avoid accountability while also trying to destabilize your confidence in your own perspective. Sometimes the manipulation becomes more subtle. They may behave as though nothing really happened and attempt to return to the relationship as if the conflict never occurred. This creates confusion and can pressure you into pretending the issue was never serious. All of these reactions serve the same purpose, restoring the control they lost when you stopped correcting or absorbing the consequences of their choices. The more consistent you remain, the harder it becomes for these tactics to pull you back into the old pattern. When you choose silence and consistency instead of reacting emotionally, something significant happens in the dynamic with a narcissistic person. For a long time, their sense of power may have depended on your reactions. Arguments, explanations, emotional responses, and attempts to repair the relationship all gave them a form of influence. Even negative reactions can feed their sense of control because they confirm they still have the ability to affect your emotions and pull you back into the interaction. But when you remove those reactions, the entire system begins to change. Silence in this context does not mean weakness or avoidance. It means you are no longer participating in the emotional back and forth that once allowed them to manipulate the situation. When you stop defending yourself, stop trying to convince them to understand, and stop reacting to provocations, the usual tools they relied on begin to lose their effectiveness. Consistency strengthens this shift even more. A narcissistic person may initially test your boundary repeatedly. They may try different approaches, kindness one moment, anger the next, guilt after that, to see if any response will reopen the old pattern. In the past, even a small emotional reaction might have been enough to pull you back into the cycle. However, when your response remains steady and calm over time, they begin to realize that the control they once believed they had is no longer there. The emotional leverage disappears because you are no longer responding in ways that fuel the interaction. This can be deeply unsettling for them because the power they relied on was never truly independent. It existed largely through your willingness to engage in the pattern they created. Perhaps the most difficult realization for a narcissistic person is understanding that someone has stepped out of the role they once controlled. In many relationships, narcissists unconsciously assign roles to the people around them. One person becomes the peacemaker, another becomes the supporter, and very often a partner becomes the one who absorbs emotional pressure and continually works to maintain the relationship. Over time, the narcissist begins to see this arrangement as permanent. They assume the other person will always react in predictable ways, chasing them, forgiving them, or trying to repair whatever damage has occurred. Because of this belief, they rarely imagine that the other person might eventually stop playing that role. When you begin to change your responses, it disrupts the entire structure they relied on. If you stop chasing after them when they distance themselves, if you stop explaining your feelings repeatedly, or if you simply allow their decisions to stand without trying to correct them, the narcissist suddenly finds themselves in unfamiliar territory. What makes this moment powerful is that the shift does not come from confrontation or retaliation. It comes from stepping out of the pattern itself. You are no longer participating in the emotional script that once defined the relationship. The reactions they counted on are no longer present. For the narcissist, this can feel confusing and even threatening. The dynamic they believe they controlled starts to unravel because it depended heavily on your cooperation. When you step away from that role, they are forced to face a reality they did not expect, that their influence was never as absolute as they believed, and the relationship cannot function the same way without your participation. The truth is simple yet powerful. A narcissist's sense of control only exists as long as someone else maintains it for them. When you stop rescuing them, stop reacting, and stop absorbing the consequences of their choices, the illusion they depended on begins to crumble. They are forced to face reality, the outcomes of their own decisions, the permanence of boundaries, and the limits of their influence. This is not about punishing them or being cruel. It is about stepping into your own strength and refusing to participate in the cycle that once kept them in control. By allowing them to live with their final decisions, you reveal the consequences they always tried to avoid. And within that space, true freedom begins to appear, not only for you, but for them as well, because accountability and reality are lessons they can no longer escape.